Microphone check 1 2. This would be audio microphone check 1 2. Microphone check 1 2. This is audio microphone test 1 2.
If they want me, I can come back and smudge them after I finish up the hill.
Huh? So she said, all right, she'll just do a small one. Huh? Like all the delegates to please take their seats. So, Robbie, if there's anybody out there, drag him in. Good morning. I'd like to welcome all of you here to this amazing 2 days that we have in front of us. This is the second, which will hopefully be an annual gathering of Indigenous guardians from across Canada. And the first order of business, I would like to invite an elder from Kitigan-Zibi. That's one of the coolest names in the Indigenous communities. Verna McGregor, who will welcome all of you formally.
Good morning, Kwekakina. Good morning. First of all, I have to apologize. They called me the other day to come in do an opening, and usually I like to take my time, smudge everybody. Problem is, I have another event up the hill at the Chateau Laurier, which they booked me about two months ago. And so I have to smudge and run. Just kidding. My name is Verna McGregor. Verna, Nindishnikas, Kitigan-Zibi, Nindonchiba, Nimkipenesi. I'm from Kitigan-Zibi, which is 120 kilometers north of here. We are one of 10 Algonquin communities. There's 9 Algonquin communities in Quebec, 1 in Ontario. I usually bring a little slide, so I'll see how this works. I do this for a lot of people, so everybody in the room knows that I always say that welcome to Turtle Island, which is North America. And why did we call it Turtle Island? Because if you look at it, it looks like a turtle, but there's big, deep teachings to that too, and it's tied also even with the area here, one of our sacred sites as well, with the turtle, which is a longer story. For us, as Nishnabek, Algonquin, we call ourselves a Mamaninawag, which is the nomads. We're known for the birch bark canoe, so our clan system was based on the watershed, and the significance of Ottawa here is that you're at the confluence of the 4 rivers coming together from the 3 rivers coming together from the 4 directions. So you have the Ottawa River, you have the Gatineau River, which we call Tanagadin-Sibi, coming from the north. You have the Rideau River, which is a funny river, which is, they call that Passapaquetchuan. No, not Passapaquetchuan. Yeah, Passapaquetchuan. I'm still asleep here. And it's a north-flowing river coming from the south. So we'd meet here, and that's the significance of the Chaudière Falls. There was controversy of development of that, but it's been in controversy for a long time because it was our sacred area. We didn't have Indigenous keepers. We did have them, but we were silenced, Indigenous guardians of our sacred sites. So now it's under development. But the other part too as well, so that's why the sacred area, even today now we have people who have meetings, even here we are. We have people from the 4 directions coming to meet here. Parliament Hill, we call that Sinopkong. And if you see that, you'll see the sinis, the rocks on behind Parliament Hill. It was also a focal point. So here we are. This is one of our relatives. And again, too, when we talk about Indigenous guardianship, I always say that to everybody. There was a difference in our understandings. too as well. Even more so, I'm honored to meeting here as with the Guardians. Again, here we are. I just have this. This is our Elder William Commanda with our wampum belts. The one at the top, he has the 7-fire prophecy. I believe we are in prophecy right now because of the climate change. And that was foretold even with the belts, with the coming of the newcomers. But for us too as well, I say as Algonquin, we met Samuel de Champlain, Sammy Champlain in Tadoussac, 1604. And bringing him down the river here, the Ottawa River. And I said that he wanted to go westward. And I said, I don't know if that was a good thing, but here we are. But the other part is also too as well, first of all, I said this last night, he was looking for a route to China for trade in Asia. But when he arrived in 1604, by 1616, there's a difference in understanding again. A lot of times all he saw was the riches here. And he saw the riches to be made starting with the cod fishery. And look at now with the demise of the cod fishery and the whaling, then it came with the fur industry, the lumber, the timber. So by the time he'd go back to his own mother country, they had it all calculated how much money they would make from the resources from the new lands here. But here we are now at a crisis because we've overdeveloped. They've over-harvested. And that's the understanding of the Mamaninawag. I mean, nomad is that we move from place to place so that you do not over-harvest the resource. And there we are. And this is just a structure that was recently by the Portage Bridge, which is called a gathering. Well, I put that in there. As the top, you see the Dreamcatcher. But the Dreamcatcher, there's a different story to it. It's always a reminder that we're all interconnected. I tell this to a lot of non-Native people, is our understanding is what we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. It's interesting, though, too, as well. I came across a paper the other day from a Hopi elder that came to visit Kitagon-Zibi in 1998 with William, and he was there with Arvo Looking Horse. And I thought I'd read it because it sort of ties in with your work as Indigenous guardians from a Native perspective. And what he said here is, don't make profit from this because these were teachings from the elders. Prophecy is not to be sold. It is like the land. We do not sell that land because it's still not rightfully ours. We are keepers. We are caretakers. We are watching this land for the Creator. That was our understanding we made with the Creator. Let us leave it that way. Like I said, the land isn't for sale. The prophecies aren't for sale. And the elders knew that one day we would become also greedy. We're going to have some loose change in our pockets because we have become so attached to the face value of that metal, that little piece of paper with these numbers on it. But this is where I find interesting too. So he said, but soon that little paper is going to phase out. It will soon become obsolete. And I find that interesting because I said, here we are in the age of technology. This is like 20 years ago. And now we're in the process also of entering the age of even Bitcoin, where we will have no longer maybe paper money. We don't use it as much now. So on that note, why I said that though too as well is the Indigenous guardians are also like caretakers of the land. I was up on Parliament Hill last night, but I said even everybody, regardless of our race, we need to become caretakers of the land and our understanding of the 7 generations. So I'm going to say a little prayer and ask you to Nanibwek Pizigwik. And I say it in the language to honor our ancestors whose lands also we're meeting on and who've met here for millennia in the past. And I don't have my... Let's see. So I say, Miigwech Gijemanedo. On Jenigashkito Jama and Dose Conshen Nongo, Mamma Kakina, Pemadzijik. We do Quagia Kakina, Mam de Gen and Jinu and Daganak. Shwen Mishnon and Abigis. Migwech Onje Kakina Gagisha and Danonge, Mam de Gen, Ninda Kimanan. Shkai Kikwejan Kazon in the Kimanan. Shwen Mishnon and Abigis. We do kwagya kakina mam de ge pamadzajik kana shonach don yan in the kimanon mam de ge nishnabe ki. Mi gwechonje kakina ete kijagon kizis de bikizis a shichanong shak. Mi gwechonje kakina ya nibi pang sing. CB saigan esa gashikchikamik. Mi gwechonje ya ishkode gagimishin chimino abstoya. We do kwagyen in wak chimashkaus watch the nagadwab danyan ishkode. We do kwagya kakina, mi gwechonje in mishon sinan nigok misnana shich kakina, nindabano jisha gashij niget tewasajik. Kan sheshkwat nigwe de simen ke gokish mana doshij kananoj guj nigwe de simen. We do kwagya ye kusajik damagazajik, we wisnajik kayeminibajik. Mi gwech. I say mi gwech is thank you. And I hope you have a good day. Before I leave, I'll tell you a little story, though. I sit with my mother, with the grandmothers in Kitagan-Zibi, but really the whole territory, we're still unceded, meaning we never signed treaty. So my mother and my aunts went to visit some of her relatives in La Vranje Park. So we stopped and to look at an area that was clear cut. So when we went in, the game warden came right away and asked what we were doing there. And I said, well, we're just coming to look, it's en français, we were just coming to look at the forest. And then I said, by the way, I said, why are you bothering us? I said, we're on our traditional lands here. I said, we're not the ones who cut out all the land here, who stripped the land. I said, the other part is, I said, you're a game warden, are you not? He goes, yes. I said, well, isn't a game warden's role to protect the animals? And he said, yes. I said, so again, why are you bothering us? Why are you not bothering the forestry company that has clear-cut this all? Is that protecting the animals? And then he started to shake, and then my mother says, Vernie, you better get in the car. I think he's going to have a heart attack. So I'm honored that, we have the Indigenous guardians, because, again, we do bring a different understanding, and it's time for us to rise. So I say, miigwech, and have a good day. And if you need to smudge, I'll come back after my meeting up the hill, but I have to apologize. I have to smudge and run. Thank you.
Miigwech, Verna, thank you very much for your warm welcome to your territory. And we haven't got clearance with the fire department, so you just heard the trucks go by a few minutes ago. We don't want them descending on it, on our meeting. And if you do want to smudge, we'll make arrangements with the hotel to allow for that to happen. Good morning once again. My name is Dave Porter, and I'm the chair of the Indigenous Leadership Initiative. Some of my colleagues are here today. Miles Richardson has joined us and will be speaking shortly. Good morning, Miles. Stephen Cackway is also here. I don't see him in the room, but I assure you I did see him last night, so he is here. And Ovid Mekrady also will be joining us later this afternoon. And also, I'd like to introduce you to our director and my co-moderator, Valerie Courtois. And as well, I'd like to also introduce to you our organizing staff for this event. And they are Carol Kavanagh, Melody Morrison, and Jen Cerulli. And some of you may have met them last night when you registered for the event. They'll be here throughout the next 2 days. And if you need any assistance, I encourage you to seek them out. Also, we'd like to inform you that our plenary session will be live streamed for the entire 2 days on the ILI website. The website is www.ilinationhood.ca. Again, that's www.ilinationhood.ca. And as well, if you haven't already used them, the washrooms as you go out are to your right. And to launch into our deliberations, I'd like to now ask Val to walk us through the proposed agenda for the next 2 days. Valerie?
Thank you, Dave. Hello, everyone. It's a glorious day to be together. I'm very glad to see you all here. As you may know, this workshop came together in about 2 months. So when Dave points out the organizing committee, they've been working very, very hard to make sure that you are all here today with us. Also, you may have noticed that this is called a workshop. And so by definition, we are really hoping to have your contributions and your ideas and your thoughts. And so if you would not mind and take advantage of this opportunity, this is really your time to shape what the Guardians Network and how the partnership with Canada is going to look like. So we are extremely thrilled that you're here. Thank you for making the journey. I know some of you are a little tired this morning from the journey. I saw many of you arriving to the hotel. Some of you have come from quite far. It may be a little early for some of you, so thank you very much for making that journey. So in a minute, we will be opening with the plenary session. We will solve that in a second. The plenary session, so we'll have Miles join us in a second. Then we'll have a quick break. We'll also have a question and answer session. Again, this is a workshop. It's meant to be very dynamic. We're hoping to hear your voices, so please feel free to ask questions, bring up your ideas. This is what it's all about. At 11:20, we're going to go into plenary again and discuss the discussion paper. I hope you've all received it in your email. If not, you'll see a version in your package. At 12 o'clock, we'll be breaking for lunch in the foyer just outside the room here. Then we'll come back into breakout sessions. The breakout sessions we're going to all discuss the same thing, so it doesn't matter. Don't worry if you're in one group or the other. It is really meant to create a much more, a smaller group, a more conducive atmosphere to conversation, and we will be working through the specifics about essentially what the network should look like, what it should do, what it should feel like, and how it should serve you, as well as what are some of your priorities in terms of the partnership with the Government of Canada. Those sessions will be facilitated by ILI members. There will be scribes and recorders in the room, as well as audio recorders, so everything will be very well captured. And then we'll come back into plenary after that. You'll notice this evening that there's 2 special sessions. One is dinner will be here, and we'll have a performance by Simca Martin, who's a very talented young lady who is going to thrill us with a performance. I don't know what it is yet. I'm kind of anxious to find out with you. And this evening, we've got Stephen Nita, who is a NICE committee member of the Indigenous Circles of Experts, which was a group that was pulled together to work on the Pathways to 2020 target, or the Aichi target, which is to reach 17% protection on lands by 2020 and 10% on marine areas. Stephen served often as the de facto acting chair, co-chair of the committee, has traveled across the country and really had a chance to listen to a number of perspectives about Indigenous-led conservation or protected and conserved areas. And of course, there's a very direct link between management of our lands through tools like Indigenous protected areas and the stewardship responsibilities that we can fulfill through Guardians. Why is this happening now? Well, we've been working with the Government of Canada for about 1.5 years now to try to help figure out how to move forward on this. And now is the time to help shape exactly what that network is going to look like, what the funding streams are going to look like, and how it needs to be responsive to your needs. In the fall, we do have hopes and intentions, and we met with the minister just yesterday, who confirmed that there is support in place. We will have our large National Indigenous Guardians gathering that will assemble even more of you here in Ottawa. This specific workshop was really meant to bring together the programs that exist, the experts, or those who have really made steps towards the creation of your programs in the last few years to specifically shape the network. But of course, we will be organizing and co-hosting a national gathering in the fall. So without further ado, I'd like to ask and introduce Miles Richardson to come and give us a vision for Guardians and how that is a genuine nationhood movement. And Miles, I'll let you introduce yourself, if that's fine. Thank you.
Hello, Val and Dave, for chairing this meeting. Thank you to the Kitawan Zibi elder, the representative, for the opening prayer, and join all you in acknowledging that we're here meeting on their territories. I'm Miles Richardson. I am Kilsly Kajisting from the Haida Nation, and I'm a senior advisor with the Indigenous Leadership Initiative. There's no better way, I think, to open this discussion, this meeting, than what the wise elder just said to us, that it's time that we rise up. And really, to me, what that means in rising up is just being who we say we are, just being who we know we are, as peoples in the human sense, and as nations in the sense of relating to each other as peoples in our places. Really, each of us know who we are. There's been, for the last 150 years in this country, serious concerted attempts to convince us that we're somebody else, that we're this notion called Indians in some generic category that sits around and waits for gifts from up the road from Parliament, when really we know that the status quo in our territories, in our lives, is the fact that we are ancient peoples, that we've been in our places for hundreds of generations, for thousands of years. And one of the key reasons that we are still here today as the living generations is that in the relationship between our people and our places, that there's an imperative for responsible stewardship. That if we're going to leave something for the next generation, we need to act as humans now, maintain the balance of life in our territories best we can, and leave something for the future. That's why we're still here. After all these attempts, after all these thousands of years, we hold that in common. And through this Guardians Network, what we're attempting to do is to recognize that common value of our societies as Indigenous people, as Indigenous nations, and to work with Canada to instill that value in the nation-state of Canada, in the country of Canada. Canada needs us as Indigenous people more than ever, as we see the climate change crises, the so-called ecological crises, the challenges of living in balance with all of the rest of life in our places that we need. Canada needs us now more than anything. And that, in a very basic sense, is what the Guardians Network is built on, is that understanding and that hope that we can work with Canada to carry out our respective responsibilities to that responsible stewardship ethic. Over the next 2 days, we're going to discuss how you want to work together to accomplish that. And the essence of the output over these 2 days, the very basic one, is how we're going to govern this network, your network. This network isn't owned or directed by the ILI. We came forward with an idea. We don't have authority over anything. We weren't elected or put in place by anybody. But we have this idea, and we've a bunch of through this group and the organizations that support us, we've worked to support Indigenous nationhood, and will continue to work to support Indigenous nationhood. One of the priorities that we identified about, how long ago was it, Val? 3 years ago? 4 years ago? 3 years ago was this, what I just mentioned to you, this ethic for responsible stewardship that various nations across this country had manifested in Guardians programs in their own areas. I know in Haida Gwaii we call it ours the Haida Gwaii Watchman. That's been around for about 30 years. And across this country there's about 30 that exists. And many of you are here because you want to develop similar Guardian programs, albeit in your own vision, in your own territories. And we see an opportunity to stand shoulder to shoulder with these Guardians programs and work together for our common objectives. To accomplish that, we need a decision-making process that you agree with. That's what we call governance. Governance is how we make decisions amongst this network. That's your network. So you need to make sure that this decision-making process serves your needs, serves your objectives in working with others on Guardians initiatives. And really importantly, you need to make sure it's not dragging you into something that you don't want to be a part of. That's really important. You know, once you put this governance process in place, the Indigenous Leadership Initiative group is going to ride off into the sunset. We'll have nothing to do with this anymore. We'll advise if anybody wants us to provide advice here and there, but it's going to be run by the governance process that you put in place. And if we're really successful, that Canada participates in, because we want this ethic, this value, to be infused as much a part of Canada as it is a part of our nations. I assume Canadians want to survive through millennia in this place that they've also come to call home. So we'll need to work together to make that happen. So I know I'm being repetitive and I'm being purposely so. By the end of the day tomorrow, we're going to have, after I'm done, Val's going to go through the details of governance option we're putting forward. We're going to break out into workshops where you're going to have a chance to discuss it in detail in terms of the 5 questions that have been laid out. We're going to come back in plenary session. We're going to discuss it again. And then you're going to take home whatever governance option we come up with, talk about it with your own people and see if this network is for you. See if we've got it close enough that you are committed to joining and being a part of this network. And if we have enough interest, if we do that job well enough, I think we're going to convince Canada to join us and perhaps finance us. As many of you may be aware, in Budget 2017, about 14 months ago, the Government of Canada responded. We put in a $500 million ask to the Government of Canada for a full-blown Guardians network coast to coast to coast in this country. The Government of Canada decided to put $25 million into a pilot project to give some examples of how a National Guardians network may look, and also to build a plan for how that $500 million would eventually be spent in a fair way. So this governance piece is going to inform that proposal, that approach to how we proceed to continue to go after that $500 million. So that's a critical piece. I'm sorry, I have a job here too. I have notes on points that I'm supposed to deliver as part of this. And let's remember, and I know I underlined it in my previous comments, but the Indigenous Guardians and a national network of Indigenous Guardians, very importantly, is about nation building, and it's about supporting you in defining your nationhood in a modern context, in a context and in a way that is effective for you as a nation making decisions going forward. And let me explain the second piece about, and really the essence of this governance option that we're putting forward. In the governance option we're putting forward, it's turned upside down from the usual government program approach. What we're putting forward is that the highest authority, the top priority for resources in the Guardians network is the Guardians program owned and run by each nation. And each nation being defined by the relationship between a people and their place. Each of you know what I'm talking about. We talk about the Kaska Dene, we talk about the Haidas, we talk about the Nishkas, we talk about the Heltsuk. Each nation knows who their place and people are. And you design in your own way, in your own objectives, what your Guardians program will look like. And this whole network is intended to bring together like-minded allies in supporting each of us in that pursuit. And then we see there's a need for regional affiliations, for you to work together with your neighbors for things like maybe you could deliver training more effectively. Maybe you could deal with insurance more effectively. Maybe you could build communication systems more cost effectively. I don't know, what advantages are there into working together? We're going to hear from coastal First Nations out in British Columbia who've been doing this for the past few years, and they're going to share with us some of their experiences, some of the challenges and some of the benefits of working together in an alliance. But we need to build those right across the country. And then the third level of the governance thing is really the lowest level, is the national authority where we have a 50-50 board with the Government of Canada, not a political board, but a board like a foundation. Many of you are familiar with Canada's Healing Foundation that came out in the wake of RCAP, Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, in about 96. Just a foundation whose job will be to fairly allocate the $500 million or whatever that federal money ends up being. To get that money as effectively as we can out of the hands of the federal government into your programs on the ground. That will be their main task. And their task will be to hold the vision that we initially lay out for the National Guardians Network, those ethic of sustainability, that ethic of a nation-to-nation relationship and working in partnership to achieve that. You know how things are today, and this is what we're fighting. And one reason that we're not meeting with the federal government here today, with the minister standing up here and all full of officials, which was our intention, is kind of things went off the rail on the government-to-government relationship for a few months. Things went off the rail on working in partnership. The federal government is very used to defining an issue, usually a problem, putting a policy to it, like absorbing all these Indians into the body politic of Canada, which was their motive for the Indian Act, putting in place a piece of legislation, allocating some money to it, and then having everybody line up to do what they want you to do. That's how federal programs essentially work. We want none of that. Zero. If that's the way they want to do it, ILI's not interested. Not one bit. That is not nation to nation. We need to adopt this governance process, which I described as upside down from that, where the highest authority is your program, owned by your nation, in your territory. That's what we're all about recognizing those, honoring those, and working together, shoulder to shoulder, to make those successful. Make sure that this governance process does that for you before you approve it. That's my advice. And we don't have all the answers. You know, we stand for the principles of nation to nation and working in partnership. You have to make sure this works for you. Nobody else can do that for you. That's why you're here. It's really good to have all of you here. Last night, seeing everybody come in, and this morning, seeing everybody that's in this room, it feels really good. You know, after our meeting with the minister yesterday, I feel like we have a chance to do this. Every day it's more obstacles. We're not used to working on a nation-to-nation basis. We're not used to holding each other up as nations. But I know we're really good at it. When we do it, we're really good at it. And we usually do it in times of duress and times of trouble. But this is an opportunity that we need to do that with each other with. And I think we're going to do it. You know, yesterday we went to sort this out with the Minister McKenna, Minister of Environment, who Parliament appointed to oversee on behalf of the whole government of Canada this Guardians Network initiative. And we ran into some trouble where they were dictating terms to the Guardians Network, and we said, hold it. Forget that. We're not interested in going down that road again. So, you know, after months of just looking at each other, she finally agreed to talk about it. We looked each other in the eye, and she said to us, I continue to be committed to nation-to-nation relationship guiding this Guardians Network, and I continue to be committed to the principle of partnership. And you, Indigenous people, hold the pen. You come forward with drafts. You come forward with solutions to our challenges, and we'll agree after discussion on how we move forward. And her capable staff are here today to make sure that's exactly what they do. Jessie will make sure that she lives up to her word this time. So, I didn't exactly follow my script, but I said most of what I wanted to say. So let's just go over how this unfolded. Like 3 years ago, this group got together and we said there's a major opportunity here. The federal government has just announced that they are committed to developing a proper nation-to-nation relationship. We said, holy smokes, this is what First Nations have been asking for since the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which is what they committed, what Britain committed to its Indigenous allies on the East Coast. We're going to relate to you on a nation-to-nation basis. And we, the British Crown, will stand side by side to protect your inherent jurisdictions. The only way that those will change is with a formal treaty with our Crown. Otherwise, all your jurisdictions that are inherent to you continue to exist, obviously, and we, the Crown, will work with you to protect those. That lasted about, how long? A month. They came to the Treaty of Niagara the next year, made those commitments. The First Nations came with the Haudenosaunee came with the two-row wampum, saying we're going down the river of life together, side by side, you in your canoe, we in ours, and we'll respect each other, but assert our own jurisdictions. That was the intention. 150 years ago, when the Parliament went up, they changed their mind. They decided that we weren't human enough to have rights, that we needed to forget who we were as peoples and just be good brown little Canadians. That hasn't worked out, and we've continually pushed for this nation-to-nation relationship. So when the Prime Minister and the Government of Canada stated that this was their policy, we saw how tough a road this was going to be to make this change, and knowing that as we go down this road, we got a lot of things to fight about. Pipelines, land use issues, marine, water, lots of things that we differ on. But one thing that we agree on is responsible stewardship. So why don't we take that positive agenda and work together and build this nation-to-nation relationship in that area? And that's where the Indigenous Leadership Initiative stepped forward and put this idea out. We brought that idea to the Assembly of First Nations, and it was enthusiastically supported by the national organization. And we went forward, without being a formal representative group, but promoting an idea. We took it to Canada, and we took it to the federal government. We had over 100 meetings over that year on Parliament Hill, mainly with ministers. We met with the Environment and Sustainability Committee. We met with the Finance Committee. We had strong recommendations to proceed on our proposal from both of those committees. We've generated a lot of support among political representatives, cabinet ministers, officials, political staff, senators, industry, and general influencers across the country. We told the story of the 30 successful programs that exist, and we talked about the potential of how a Guardians network could positively reshape Canada and be a part of Canadian values going forward. Through op-eds, in-depth background stories, television and print interviews, and launching a website, we presented the story and vision of Indigenous Guardians all over the country. Right from Haida Gwaii to the Innu of Labrador and Lustalkay in the Northwest Territories, where Lustalkay stood up in 10 years or so ago and proclaimed a protected area in their area, which they named Clyde Dene Nene, said this is going to be protected. We want to work with you, Canada, to do so. They've reached that agreement, and they're well on their way to establishing a protected area, well managed with their own guardians, designed by them, supported in partnership with Canada. Those are exciting stories that Canadians embraced and supported. This work and the excitement and work of the First National Guardians Gathering, to which many of you came, proved persuasive, and in the federal budget, a little over a year ago in March 2017, a pilot Indigenous Guardians initiative was supported. It's a beginning. It's a down payment on the vision. The vision is for a $500 million initiative, which will now, after today, continue to move forward to shape that vision out while we're finishing the plan for how we're going to spend that money and the governance of that whole initiative. Our role will continue up until this governance process gets into place, will be to create the space and build support for nations across the country to design and build their own guardian programs suited to their particular lands, needs, priorities, and traditions, and for the nations to design and establish a network to help sustain those programs and serve the nations from strength and shared experiences and collective efforts. I think I'm going to leave it at that, Val, and turn it over to you. Do we want to do any questions at this point? Or?
Let's do the video. And then
okay. And then you'll have plenty of time to question us or get deeper into anything we're saying here. I want you to leave with a real clear vision of how this came about and where we see it going. You're going to have to shape this next step. That's really important. It's not legitimate unless you, the owners of this network, shape the governance of it and the priorities for what we're going to work together on and what we're not going to touch, areas that you don't want any national alliance meddling in your terms. So thanks for your attention. Have a good, productive 2-day discussions. We'll really look forward to the results. Thank you. Hawa. Should I say here or
Did you guys want to play the video up here now? That should be good.
Muzzy Joe Miles, we love it when you go off script. And now we'd like to turn to the next agenda item. David Cushane Jr. is an elder from Turtle Lodge. Some of you may have visited him there. We've spent considerable time at the lodge, and Dave is working with ILI as a spiritual advisor to our group. He wanted to be here, but unfortunately, given his current health situation, he is not able to join us at this meeting physically, but he really wanted to engage with you and send a message. So he's recorded a video message. It's called Connecting to the Spirit in the Land. And so we're going to roll the video.
yes, we are.
Roll tape.
There's no sound.
So we're going to ask the technical person to assist in getting some audio. I'll let you work it out, Val.
Thanks, Dave. There we go. Okay, let's start this over again. Sorry about that, folks. And I believe Dave may be watching on the live stream, so we'll say hi to Dave on behalf of the whole group. He really did want to come, but he took the time to prepare this message for you. What? I'm a MacBook user, so this is my problem. There we go.
Bonjour, Anin, Dinemaganituk. Nigani aki in an edition cause, Kenyo dodem, saging donjiba. Ninakoma gijemanidu, Ninakoma gijemeteke, Ninakoma gevino atsukanak. In the words of my language, I offered gratitude and our thankfulness to the Great Spirit, to the Spirit of Mother Earth, and to the Spirit of the Four Directions, and to the Spirit of our ancestors. As the original free and independent people of our homeland, we have been entrusted with a way of life and ancestral values, values that inspire our conduct as human beings and help bring us back to our relationship with the earth. As leaders of our homeland, it is our responsibility to live our duties and responsibilities to the land and to each other, and also to share our teachings with our brothers and sisters who have arrived on our homelands. In the ancestral ways of our nations, in the spirit that I make an appeal to all of you that are attending this special gathering, as you discuss ways and means of how we can create initiatives in taking better care of our homeland. The elders and the knowledge keepers of our nations have always advised us that it is the land that gives us freedom and a way to survive. Prophecy had foretold that we would be propelled into the forefront of a movement requiring our leadership. Our leadership would be grounded within the ways of our ancestors. We carry a knowledge and understanding that is embedded in the teachings left by our ancestors. In order for humanity to move forward, we must align ourselves with the forces of nature. For that to happen, we must have a spiritual relationship with the land. The land is a living entity with great power. She has always operated on the principle of balance and harmony. As we, as human beings, have become so unbalanced, nature and her power will help bring us back into balance. These teachings were received through having a relationship with the Spirit. It is within the spiritual realm that we believe that the higher intelligence exists. Our ancestors have always known this. This was the reason why they never overstepped the Spirit. That relationship was always honored in the ceremonies of our people. And if we are ever to find ourselves, we must return to the beginning. The beginning is the Spirit we find in ceremony and on the land. If we continue to limit ourselves to a colonial mindset, we will never find the Spirit. It is the Spirit that can help us to define the direction we need to go. As we return to actively taking care of the land, to be a voice of the land, as messengers are shared from nature itself. The land wants to talk to us, to remind us of the original instructions we were given by our great Creator. As much as we have been ripped away from the ancestral ways of our nation, there are those amongst us who have kept their language alive and who continue to hold the ceremonies of our people. These are the ones we must turn to offer guidance and direction as we find ways to return to the land. The knowledge keepers that know our traditions are fast disappearing. We have to make a concerted effort to reach out to them and also to find ways to record their teachings. As we develop our models for stewardship, allow our knowledge keepers to take a lead and help lay a foundation based on a ceremonial context. This will connect us to the Spirit and support the natural laws of the earth. We have a rare opportunity here to develop a model in the spirit of our nationhood, a model that defines our duties and responsibilities of taking care of the land. Our identity as a people is reflected in our spirituality. We are a spiritual people. Our gifts given to us by the Great Spirit, our languages, our ceremonies, our pipes, our teachings, our songs, and our way of life ensure a strong connection and relationship with the Spirit and the land. The knowledge we hold as a people is required more than ever to share with those who have arrived on our homeland. This is our duty and responsibility, to show them why we love the land so much and how we can take better care of the land. The knowledge of our natural laws and spiritual ways of connecting with the land is held by the knowledge keepers of our nation. We must now call upon them for their help, and if we do not, we will fast track ourselves into total assimilation, having lost what can give us strength and define our true identity as a people. The ways of our ancestors hold a full understanding of our interconnectedness with all of creation. Our dreams are telling us that there will be some great changes coming. The earth is about to give birth to a new life. In that new life, the earth will return us to balance. These will be difficult times for all of us. It is said that all that does not respect the laws of nature will be removed. Much of this is the technology we depend upon so much today. We must adapt to the changes that the earth will go through. We must find our way back to the land, living the values that will ensure our survival. For example, we never take more from the land than what we need as individuals. If we happen to take more than what we need, we must share it, or we become selfish and greedy. We make offerings for everything we receive from the land. We treat the animal world with absolute respect, knowing they give their life for us to live. Mostly everything our ancestors did was to honor all life in a ceremonial way. Let us seriously consider moving forward in the ways of our ancestors, beginning by including the Spirit to be in our presence as we search for a path that will take us back to the land. And this will include our sacred gifts, such as the pipe, the rattle, the drums, and there are other ways practiced by other nations. If we are going to send our youth to the land to act as caretakers, then we must be prepared. We must prepare them spiritually to learn the ways that they will be able to hear the voice of the land, spoken through nature itself. Nature has an abundance of knowledge. Young people need to be spiritually connected to the land and with their own identity before they even go to the land. Rites of passage for our young people becoming adults and leaders of our nations are very important and need to be incorporated as the foundation of their training and learning. Young people need to be initiated with the knowledge of the land. In the Anishinaabe way, our young men reaching puberty would go to the land to be initiated into adulthood by fasting for 4 days for a vision that would give him understanding of his meaning and purpose in life. Young girls entering womanhood during their first moon time would be taught by the grandmothers and the aunties, taken through their own initiation rites in which they learned their sacred role and responsibilities as life givers and as a voice for the sacredness of water. It is when we are living our responsibilities that a spiritual of unity can be realized amongst ourselves as the original peoples of our homeland. Unity can be only achieved by having a foundation of values and teachings that lead us to a common cause of taking care of the land. Expressing kindness is the simplest way to fulfilling our responsibilities, as our spiritual living laws will come to us when we reflect them. We all carry a universal purpose to bring peace and kindness into our world. Make peace with each other and make peace with the earth. There is a doorway in our hearts that needs to be opened. Mother Earth can help us open that door. We can feel the peace in nature if we listen carefully to the wind, to the birds, to the animals, and to the trees that speak, directly to our hearts. May I wish you the best that Spirit and nature can offer you in your deliberations as you continue to live from your hearts and kindness. Miigwech.
Thank you very much, Dave. I know you couldn't be here physically, but you certainly are here with us in spirit. And on behalf of all of us that are gathered here in Ottawa, we'd like to express our thanks for your beautiful words. The land wants to talk to us. Are we ready to listen? Now, we didn't anticipate the brevity of Miles's presentation. So as a consequence, we're ahead of time. So I'm going to make the decision that, well, rather than reset that button, let's open the floor to discussions. And Miles, we want you to respond to the questions that people may have or comments. Is there anyone that we have a couple of microphones here? Yes, Brother Colin.
So my Haida name is Lada, and I stand here representing the Coastal First Nations from the coast of British Columbia. And so I have a question. So my question is this: as we work doing watchman guardian work, very often we run into legislative problems. When I hear us talking about a national organization, are we talking about us taking our values and incorporate them into a legislative framework? Is that the level we're talking here?
I think that's an important question. You listen to Dave Corshane, who's a spiritual guide for us. Any authorities that are in my opening comments, I talked about, we've been here for hundreds of generations, for thousands of years. Our authorities, our rights as humans to be in our place, and whatever authorities come to that are inherent. That's our side of the nation-to-nation relationship. So in the first instance, our authorities come from the fact that we've been in our places since beyond human memory. Now, when we go out, as every one of you has experienced, I've certainly experienced this in my life, in my territory, in each of your territories, not everybody respects that or recognizes that. Sometimes we've got to work with other governments for their people, their authorities, to come in line with our authority. That's been the Haida Nation's experience. 30 years ago, 25 years ago, we passed legislation to stop the destruction of our island. It took 15 years to negotiate with other governments mirror legislation. So where their people were directed by their law to respect our law. That's what we're talking about here. In the nation-to-nation relationship, one thing you may find in this network is one of the things that you could stand together on is to define common legislative prescriptions that the government of Canada, or maybe even provincial or municipal governments, could put in place to respect your law. I hope that's one of the outcomes of our decision-making process. That, the Haidas did it in one way. Not everybody has to reinvent the wheel every day. We can learn from each other. The Nishkas did it another way. We can learn from the way they've done it. The Lutzelke have done it another way. We can share and learn from each other and move forward faster. But it's all based on our own inherent jurisdiction. That's what nation to nation means. But the reality is, we've got to Dave Corshane called it peace. We've got to figure out how to get along, and sometimes them moving in their legislative area is important to that. Does that explain it? That's our intent anyway.
If I could just add to that answer.
You're supposed to ask a question. I'm giving the answers here.
My name is Stephen Nita. I'm from the Sissigadena First Nations in Denede in the Northwest Territories. In the Northwest Territories, there's an interesting legislative development that's happening by the government of Northwest Territories. They're creating a number of legislation since they've taken administrative control over lands and resources in the Northwest Territories. And the way we create legislation in the Northwest Territories is through collaborative approach between Indigenous governments and Crown governments. The site in the Nene protected area that Miles mentioned that I'm a part of, we've created 26,000 square kilometers of protected area that we're creating, I should say. And that's done through establishment of legal contractual agreements between my nation and the Crown governments, one with Parks Canada, and that agreement will amend the National Parks Act to reflect the contractual agreement we negotiate. And the legislation that's been developed in the Northwest Territories for protected legislation is simply an enabling legislation. It's not prescriptive. Where the prescription comes in is through the legal contractual establishment agreements that describes how that law will be implemented. So that one law will not be the same law that's applied across the territory. It'll be applied based on the legal agreement that's reached between the government of Northwest Territories and Indigenous nations. And that's just for the settler society to respect Crown laws that conforms to our laws within those protected areas. I just thought I'd add to that answer.
Thank you very much, Steve. And as you look on your agenda, you'll note that Steve will be doing a presentation later this evening on his nation's experience in working with the governments of Canada and the NWT. Now, Colin, one of the issues that we looked at when we talked about the governance approach is the legislated model. Because what we find is that when you deal with current law, you run into the obstacles that Colin talks about. You may enter into some problems with taxation issues. If you formulate your organizational structure in terms of a charitable trust, then you get penalized if you stand up and talk about your rights. And so a lot of those different options that are embedded in current law don't really work for us. So yes, you're right. If we arrive at a governance solution, and if we were able to legislate that entity, that would be the preferable option. But given the time factor, we really don't have a lot of time to go that route at this juncture, because one of the things the minister, in our conversations yesterday, not only did she reaffirm that she will work with us in partnership, not only did she reaffirm to respect the nation-to-nation process, but she also said to us she wants funding out the door. The government is finally at that position to start looking at funding some of the ideas and the proposals that you have and that you are considering. So I think that you may arrive at a governance structure that suits your needs, the needs of the network, and ultimately, like the $500 million, that is a commitment. We are not deterring from that. And we see the $25 million as an initial investment. The objective is to have guardians in every nation of this country, and we will work toward that. And similarly, as you wrestle with the governance question, it may be a temporary solution that you arrive at, and that we would then, I think, pursue working with government to have whatever governance model you arrive at to be legislated so that it could represent what is required to effectively give you that organizational representation. And so often governments, there's so much trappings of the old world that find its way into our government structure. They no longer wear the white wigs and the black cloaks, but a lot of their idea of governance is anchored into institutional governance structure that emerged in the old country, as they call it, fondly. One of the things that they say is that only the government can bring legislation, and that the government, in the formulation of legislation, cannot engage you, the people, the citizens. Well, that's not really true. I mean, you could arrive at any solution that the parties sit down to agree on. And we demonstrated that a number of years ago in British Columbia under the premiership of Gordon Campbell. We negotiated with Mr. Campbell a $100 million trust to deal with the capacity issues of our communities in BC. And then when we arrived at that agreement, we then decided as to what vehicle should manage that trust. And so we ended up with what we call the New Relationship Trust. And it's very much alive. It spits out about $7 million a year in interest rates, so the principal is never touched. And that $7 million a year is being invested directly in the communities with the elders, with the youth, on language, retention, and as well on education. I think there's over 2,000 bursaries that have been funded. But when we sat down with the government, we sat down with a blank piece of paper, and we negotiated the legislation to establish. We wrote that legislation together. And as a matter of fact, and they tell you you can't sit on the floor of the House of Commons. If you do, all these people will, in black cloaks, will run after you and drag you out of there. But in this instance, when we agreed to that legislation, we were sitting on the floor of the legislature with the members of the legislature, the provincial legislature. And it's one of the few times in the BC legislative history that an act was introduced in one day, went through all the appropriate procedural readings, and passed in the same day. That very rarely happens in government as we know it. And so that is something we put forward as advice, that the best way to ensure that your governance structure is respected and upheld is to embed that structure in law and make it work to meet your needs. So we're still open for comments. Frank? Can you make that happen? Ask your brother. We weren't going to make political speeches here. No, that's a factual speech.
So my name is Frank Brown. My English name, my ancestral name is Gladliasila from the Hilfzog First Nation from Bella Bella on the BC Central Coast. I was just listening to the Miles, your comments, and the spiritual leader, Mr. Corshane, and he said something that Mr. Porter echoed, and that's to listen to the land. And if we listened to the land and took our lesson from the land, and it's just to your comments, Mr. Richardson, I think if we look at our history on this great land as Indigenous people, we survived throughout the millennia, through the hundreds of generations, because our ancestors were able to adapt and adopt to the circumstances, to the climate, to the resources that were available to us. And so there's a term that Western science uses around biodiversity. And I think biodiversity, in fact, mirrors cultural diversity. And we come from various bioregions from this continent. And if the program mirrors both the biological diversity and cultural diversity, and as this gentleman was speaking about, where the governance structure is a higher level, and then each is reflected between the nation to nation, national government of Canada and Indigenous nations, then I think we could, this would be very not only unique, but resilient as a mechanism going forward, because it's quite unprecedented. And in fact, I think it would inform the very issue that you spoke about, Miles, in the challenge that humanity has around sustainability and how we're going to move forward with our shrinking natural resources. And as Indigenous people, we know that we have been a witness to the boom and bust of resource extraction since Canada became a nation state, because it's always been about coveting resources for financial gain rather than, as newcomers, taking it and bringing it back home. But now these newcomers are home, so it's a part of that reconciliation process. So those were some of the thoughts that came to my mind as you spoke. Wallace Gayasika, thank you.
I thank you, Frank. That's our nations. I think through this process, as collectively we create space for each of our nations to redefine ourselves in that modern context, but really importantly also for each of us to tell our own stories to the world. I think beginning with Canadians, they're going to see that they need what's in us. I couldn't say it any better than you just did, but that's where I think this has potential to lead. What is in our cultures, the reasons that we're still here as a living generation of our people, Canada and the rest of the world also need. And this is going to be a chance to bring that out, working together with them. And Colin, to answer your question to Dave, yes, I think we've seen that what Dave described about truly cooperating in legislation, and that's a mutual thing. Their legislation's important because right now it's prevalent. But our legislation is where it begins. And we need to be strong enough in our own governments to define our way forward and have them match that and reflect that. But to answer your question, we can do that if we stand shoulder to shoulder as nations. You know, many of you have accomplished that as individual nations. But imagine if we stood together on a sustainability principle or a law. I know we can do it. We will do it. It's up to us to want to do it.
Thanks, Frank and Miles. We'd also like to hear about your expectations for the next 2 days. If you have a vision, a thought, this is a time where we can make adjustments to the agenda, make sure that we consider your expectations and your needs from being here. Any more thoughts or questions related to the first session? Chief Planis?
Hello, Chief Planis from Sauk on Vancouver Island. This is for Miles, and it's relative from your territory. you're very lucky you live on an island. And that island is yours. It's nobody else's but Haida's Island. I live on Vancouver Island. There's over 50 nations. And we get along very well. We have a lot of overlap. And we have our own way of life. We're Coast Salish. Our language follows the salmon route, Sinchothan. My question today is, and I think this actually pertains to all nations in Canada. We have a map in Canada that shows the provinces, the towns, the municipalities, whatever. But we always had our own map. We had maps of our territories. And when we start doing this work, that map is going to be coming out and it's going to be drawn because we know that map. All of our nations have their own map, and they fought over that map. They know how to survive on the land because of their territories, of their foods and medicines. I just want to, maybe if you can reiterate a little bit on that from your point of view, because you're on an island, and also with the territories, this is going to be more defined. And once it is, I think it's a good advantage for us and for Canada to know our map instead of the ones they see when you open an atlas. So thank you. Haishka.
Thank you, Gordon. That's what you just said is what I meant in my opening comments when I talked about we being the status quo in this place we now called Canada. Our nations have existed here for hundreds of generations, for thousands of years, since beyond the memory of man. Our people have been in our respective territories. That's the story. That's the truth. That's the story we need to tell. That's the story that we'll tell through this Guardians Network, supporting each other in telling that. And yes, Gordon, we've had an advantage too in Haida Gwaii in that we're the only Indigenous people there. So our story was very easy to tell. And to a large degree, and we're not all the way there yet, but to a large degree, Canadians and other people in the world have begun to embrace that. And, you know, to the point where in the Haida Nation, our political position, and this is from our people, is we own this place, we're the sovereigns over this place, and we're never giving that up. If you want to have a relationship with us, nation to nation or whatever, you recognize that, you respect that. And asserting jurisdiction, law-making authority as the Haida Nation over our territories, over our homelands, it's just a matter of when, and it's a matter of how much of a price any living generation wants to pay. Similarly for every other nation, you got to make that strategic decision yourself. Your territories are yours because of your relationship with your Creator. Those were the original instructions Dave Corshane talks about. That's our truth. There's only one truth. That's the truth. Somebody's trying to give us a different story. Canada's trying to tell us we're somebody else. That's a bum story. That's not true. You know, they've got away with it for 150 years. It's over. We got to make time, support each other, and in this nation-to-nation commitment, Canada will stand with us in telling those stories, and we make those adjustments as we go forward. We can do those in a good way. As Dave Corshane tells us, we can do those in a peaceful way. But we really need to stand in our power, have our vision clearly of where we want to go, and act to make those authorities to tell our stories, to create our stories going forward. And the Guardians is just a small part of that, but an important part of that. And you know, if you want to Gordon, if you look at the 50 First Nations on Vancouver Island that you talk about, it's a tough, I mean, if you could draw that ancient map today and agree to it amongst those 50 First Nations, you'd be in the same place as only one nation being there. So that's in your power. We've got to figure out how to resolve, to define our territories as neighbors. And if there's shared interest, if there's territories where we have shared interest, we just need to be able to describe that and agree on that. They don't have to be an obstacle to us. They don't have to hold us back from being who we say we are. It's tough work to get there, but that's in our power to do that. And once we put those stories forward, there's so much strength in that, especially if we do it together. You know, and if any of you are losing heart over all these agreements and stuff, look at the James Bay Cree. In 1973, under great duress, they were looking at having all their traditional territories flooded. And in 1973, they signed a Cede Release and Surrender Treaty, a land claims agreement. Look at them today. They have more power, they have more control over their territory, over their traditional territory, than most of the nations in Canada, if not around the world. So that's what's important, is what's in your heart, what you know, what the truth is, and what you believe, and what you're willing to put one foot in front of the other to achieve. And in this forum, in this Guardians Network, in terms of responsible stewardship, we have a powerful forum to do that in one area of our agreement.
Any more thoughts before we move to break?
I got another one.
Great.
So I'm left with an impression here, and my impression is this, and I'm just going to speak like I do. I see this national Indigenous guardianship, and what you're explaining to me, there's almost a disconnect between the two. My sense is what you're talking about is a major national governance, First Nations coming together. We work together, we support each other, we tell our story, and we make it be. And my sense is to put this on a national Indigenous Guardian network is kind of almost, I see what you're doing, but I don't know if that's the right vehicle. My sense is to put that pressure on a national Indigenous Guardian level. What you're talking about, my sense is up a few steps. Like this, what we're talking about is governance, national governance, of coming together. I don't know, that's just the impression I'm left with. I just got here, I just hearing about it, but that's my initial sense, is that I'm feeling a little bit awkward.
Thanks, Lada. Thanks for sharing your sense. You know, the whole intention of the national network isn't to create governance for governance of lands. The ultimate authority for how you are going to do that, how are you going to enact your own laws, are with your own initiative. What we're talking about in the sense of the governance nationally is in terms of the partnership and relationship with the government of Canada and between us as nations. So it's how we're going to do that, how we're going to work together. What does the network need to do to serve you at your local level, and what is it going to do to help you build better relationships with other governments, industries, and other people on your lands? And so if you think about some examples of what that could look like, in the East, you know, you mentioned the Grand Council of the Cree, who, by the way, have reopened that treaty multiple times, have a number of accompanying agreements, while the Canada believes that there's a cede and surrender kind of context there. The Cree have never believed that. They've always believed that they are there because the Creator put them there and they are responsible for those lands. They have a cultural responsibility for being who they are to do that. We work with them. I'm Innu from the coast of the interior of Quebec. I'm from Lac-Saint-Jean originally. We have a very large nation. There's 11 communities. My nation in my lifetime, up until 3 years ago, was not united. We didn't know because of the Indian Act and position, because of the band council, because of how things were run, we didn't work together. Our caribou are in trouble in Quebec and Labrador. We used to have the largest herd in the world at almost 1 million animals. Last year, the last census said it was at less than 9,000. So we're at a crisis. Our lands are talking to us, are calling to us to act and take care of them. We came together as a round table, and now our whole intention is to take over the entire management of caribou for that area. Governments haven't been successful in doing that, the Crown governments. We will be, because our impetus is coming from the land calling to us. That's exactly the kind of thing that the network could help facilitate and enable. The other thing, Colin, is we really want the profession of guardianship recognized in this country. When a mine comes to a land, they need to know that they need to consider that role, that responsibility that we all hold. And so if we are successful in the network really creating that space for that profession to be recognized, it'll just enable those relationships. It'll create a condition for what we are always asking for, is the right to free, prior, and informed consent, the right to partnership, and the right to decide on the futures of our land. So that's the vision for the network. It's really not meant to usurp your own responsibilities and your own laws to your own lands. It's really meant to support and enable that, in fact.
So a national Indigenous Guardian Network is simply an entity that's based in your territory, and once this is set up, so I'm still a bit confused here. So once this is set up, if it's set up, ILI is going to walk off into the sunset, and if they're needed, they'll come back. So it's going to be managed individually by the nations, but there's no national organization?
That's exactly why we're here, Lada. Okay. So this discussion, when we say that we want to develop the principles and the shape of what this network is going to look like, this is what these 2 days are about. Who should represent you? What should this kind of table of nations or board or whatever we're going to call it look like? And how do we make decisions? What should it do? How is it accountable to you? And in terms of the ILI, we've really been, like I've always said, we've elbowed the space for this voice to be possible, for this very activity to be possible. We will always be huge fans of the network and of Guardians on the Ground. We've been supporting individual programs for a number of years. Some of you are in this room. We will continue to do that. We will make sure that the network is actually achieving its goals. As an organization, we have an interest in doing that. But in terms of deciding where funds go, figuring out the activities of the network, it's your network. So if by us stepping behind, it's not about leaving it behind. It's really about making sure that the genuine, proper voice on these issues and on these activities is there.
Just a couple questions just to follow up from this gentleman. So when I first started kind of conceptualizing what this would look like, I kind of made an assumption, and probably wrongly, that the ILI participants now, yourselves, would be part of that 50-50 committee that's going to look at the distribution of funds. If that's not the case, then how do you see us moving forward on deciding how the different communities will be represented on that board? I'm also wondering about the timelines. So this, I understand that $25 million is for, was it 4 years or 5 years? So within that timeline, where do you see at what point that we were going to go to government, or you guys will be going to government on our behalf, proposing this network? And then within the previous or the following 3 or 4 years, is that just basically implementing that? Or is it the entire 4 years that we're going to have an opportunity to establish the network? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, at what point what's our time frame for us going back to our communities and engaging them in these discussions to get buy-in on this? And then what part of that 5 years is actually implementing and see how it works on the ground? Do you know?
These are all very great questions. Thank you for them. So I'll do a brief kind of overview of our vision, but in fact, the breakout groups that you're all going to participate to today and tomorrow is exactly to work through some of that. So ILI does not want to sit on the governing board because we don't have a mandate to do that. It is really, our job has been, again, to create space, to promote the model, to point to what successes are possible when these kind of programs exist on the ground. We've even measured the financial impact of these programs, and partners on the Coastal First Nations Network have also measured the impacts of their programs. We think that vision could be realized right across. The investment was made in February 2017. Normally, when you have a budget item that's announced, there is policy work that's done around that item. There's been a memorandum to Cabinet, there's submissions to Treasury Board, all of the work around that is done. In our case, that wasn't the case for this Guardians program, which is why we are now, a year and a half after the announcement on the budget, still talking about what this could look like. The other thing is we really, when we advocated for this program, we made sure that government knew that we didn't want this to be just another program that's delivered by Indian and Northern Affairs Canada or by Environment Canada. We didn't want to have just a general call for proposal where 634 communities would individually be applying and the money would be split. Because frankly, this is really about proving the model and showing what's possible. Because again, we have the larger vision of hopefully all nations being able to develop their own programs and have their own moccasins and mucklucks on the ground to do this. ILI is always going to be an advocate for that vision, no matter what. We will, of course, once the network is formed, lean on the leadership of the network who will become the group that will be the experts in doing this. But we will continue to use our influencing abilities, our networks, our own financial funds, our own expertise to do that. Some of you may not realize it, but most of us on the ILI that you've seen have either managed programs, have run programs, have financed programs, or have been leaders when the programs were created in our nation. So we know very well how this could work and the potential of it in terms of the local reality. We are, like you, dreaming in terms of the federal process and how the national process could go. And on purpose, you'll notice that the discussion draft that will be discussed in the next session, I'll go right through it and kind of give you the history of that process and where the ideas are coming from, is really meant to catalyze discussions and put something out there. But we are hoping that the end result of these next 2 days is going to make that document and that proposal really come alive. And hopefully it'll look much more fulsome and more detailed than it does now because it will have your voice. The results of this workshop, by the way, are being collated. I'd like to point out Pamela Perot, who's in here. We've got a series of note takers who are taking down your questions, the answers, the natures of the discussion. We will produce a report that will, in very short order, be hand-delivered to the Minister of Environment and her office to tell her this is the voice of the First Nations on how we can do this. And so it's a challenge, really. That's why we're here. I hope I've answered your question.
Not so much in the timeline. I guess that's my question.
Okay.
Like, before that document or the recommendation to the minister goes forward on how the communities have said we'd like to do this, how much time do we have to go back to vet that with our own leadership and communities? Because we're only a small group here representing a larger, I don't see anyone else from the Atlantic besides ourselves here. Do you know what I mean? Like, how much of an opportunity is there going to be for input for that vision before it goes to the minister?
Essentially, the model that we're going to present to the minister is the framework, the priorities. In French, we say, qu'est-ce que ça mange en hiver? What does it eat in winter? Like, what is it going to do? How is it going to sit? We didn't want to impose the representative nature of the board. It could be based on regions. It could be based on expertise. It could be based on political institutions. It's really up to you to voice what is the best way of doing that. The network is going to be formed, I assume, over the life of the pilot. And part of the pilot period will be to produce the business case for the larger partnership. And so there will be time not only to shape that, but also test assumptions, because we are breaking ground. Now, there is some precedence for similar kind of structures or initiatives in the history of of the partnerships between Government of Canada and First Nations in Canada. So if you think about something like the Aboriginal Healing Foundation, which ran for, I believe, 10 years, 15 years, that was made up of 20 representatives from across Canada. It had representation from Canada. They had a grant and from the government and managed it as a foundation, and they had a terms of reference that then distributed the money according to how that board wanted to work, and they were accountable. They would report back to the Assembly of First Nations and other organizations. By the way, we've been interacting with the Assembly of First Nations and have kept quite close to the National Chief and the Executive and other members within the Assembly of First Nations. You'll notice in your package that there's actually a resolution that was passed in December 2015 that calls for this program and calls for a process to do that. When we met with the Assembly of First Nations, because of limited capacity within the AFN, they asked the ILI, they said, look, you guys know what you're talking about. Help us out. We'd love to be involved in the whole way. And that's exactly what's happening. So if you in your Atlantic region, which I'm a little bit familiar with, I live in Labrador, by the way, and I'm a graduate of University of Moncton. In the Atlantic region, there is a regional institution under the AFN, a regional process, but you also have Cape Breton institutions in Nova Scotia. You've got the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq. Those may be the most appropriate vehicles for your region. I know for my region and my area, it would be the nation that would be the most appropriate vehicle. So that will vary in different in different parts of Canada. I think that the network needs to be responsive to that reality. And so the challenge is on you.
Sure. To the lady that asked the question, does that clarify it sufficiently?
Thank you, yeah.
Okay, I won't have
At this point, I'd like to just call for a break. We're going to come back to a discussion. And so keep your questions, talk amongst yourselves. I can feel that it's time for a bio break. 20 minutes, and then we'll reconvene. Thank you, everybody.
Make sure you come back there. We got to be clear about that 25 million spent on ministry. Told us she's going to spend some money, and that's not on us.
Exactly.
They're going to think.
Hi, Yvette. Nice to finally meet you. Sorry I couldn't make it yesterday. It was just a whirlwind trying to get ready. Oh, good. I was talking to Ken, and he said, "Did you see Yvette?" And I said, "Not yet. I'm working on it." I'm really glad you could make it.
Yeah. I mean, really, I didn't want to blurt out there, but what's that state? It's $5 billion a year, that carbon market. That's what I worked out the numbers for.
Right.
Out of 4 provinces only. So if you take that across Canada, we're talking a lot more money than half of $5 million.
Well, and we've never had a vision that the partnership with Canada would fund everything, right? Canada's not going to fund everything. When Nation, which is a program I run, we had funds coming from our impact benefit agreements, co-management agreements with the province, different projects that would arrive, and so that variety is actually healthy for a program. And so that, I think the vision will be realized. It's just a matter of time and how we get there.
The frustrating part is, working for Tony Osadic, right? He doesn't share this stuff. And it's frustrating for me. I'm like, geez, you're not helping us at all.
Because I was working with Tonio. That's who I've kept informed.
And it doesn't come down. You know what? This whole idea that Ken and I actually put together, Tonio never even told us about he was working with Guardians. Otherwise, he would have sent it to you.
That's so disappointing. I'm glad we're meeting now.
Yes, like I did it for my own climate change coordinators. I figured, fine, you guys go to the provinces and you figure out how to get this piece of this money instead.
Right.
But, I think we all need to be working together. Like, I don't really care, who gets right.
Right.
The governance will come out of that. But
do you know how to use a Windows machine? Do you know how to pull a?
Yeah. Here, let me get my glasses. I'll help you. Hang on a second.
I'm a Mac girl. I don't know how to use it.
You should just be able to drag and drop.
Yeah. Where is it?
Just pull up 2 windows and I just drag and drop.
Pull up 2 windows.
Yeah, pull up a second one. Just go down here, like new window.
Oh, I see.
Another window. What the heck? No. Open that folder. You'll have 2 windows and just drag and drop over.
There you go. Thank you. Sweet.